Okay. Maari is an ad agency art director turned freelancer turned entrepreneur. After leaving the full-time agency space, she set out into freelance, only to discover a void between the quickly growing talent pool of freelance consultants and clients looking to connect with this resource. Uncompany was born to fill that need. In 2015, Uncompany was started to be the operating system for freelance. With her team, she's building a system for marketing teams, agencies, and brands to connect with high-caliber freelance talent, build project-based teams, and develop a custom freelance bench with simplicity and transparency in mind. Her model includes flexibilities for those looking for staffing alternatives to traditional agencies, but still a desire to do great work. Uncompany offers freelancers an alternative to two unsavory choices they often find themselves limited to: grinding, full-time work, or poorly paying freelance platforms, enabling them to get paid for their work, paid their worth, work with great clients, and do amazing work. For its clients, Uncompany offers an avenue for getting top-level creative work when they need it without job postings and phone calls.
Awesome. That was really good. Can I get a copy of that?
Sure.
Great. Well, it's appreciate you guys for showing up tonight, and I'd love to learn a little bit more about all of you guys. But that was a great introduction, so thank you so much for that. Yes.
Thank you for being here. So I know I've told you a little bit about FYSO. We have a whole group of mission-driven entrepreneurs. And I guess just to get started, let's start kind of with the earliest question. How did you approach taking the leap for the first time? Like, what was that transition like?
Yeah. It's scary. I think it would be scary now, even as it was 10 years ago. I've been independent working for about 10 years. Uncompany, I've had actually this week is our 5-year business anniversary for Uncompany. So yay, milestone. But when I started, so I was, like you mentioned, I was working as an art director in advertising agencies here in North Carolina. Prior to North Carolina, I was out in Seattle and then in New York for a little bit. So I was kind of running through the agency circuit for quite some time. And very, I loved working. I loved what I did. And I just I've always thrown myself into the work that I've done. But I just found myself burning out. I had sick family members who needed to be taken care of. I have a handicapped brother who I helped to take care of. And on top of that, I was working 60, 80, 100 hours a week with agency work, and then also traveling for months on end for shoots. And I just found myself in a place, I'm sure that everybody has or will or has multiple times, going like, there's just no way I can do all of this and do it well. And you feel really pinned against the wall. And it's I think just in general, our working world has gotten to a place where it's like, it doesn't allow for space for life to really happen, whether it's having kids, taking care of family members, taking care of yourself, transitioning careers into a new one. And I found myself doing that, when I was about 27, 28. And I just got to a place where I think a lot of entrepreneurs get to, where it's like, I'm scared to make the leap, but the alternative is to stay my current path, and I can't accept that path. So I think that a lot of times it's that breaking point, and it's almost like there's no plan B, there's only plan A that really drives you forward. And so I got to that point. I was like, I know I can't keep doing this. My health is failing. I'm not being able to, my priorities are out of whack, and I need to stop. And so that transition happened for me in 2009 to start freelancing. So I started freelancing, still doing advertising, but on my own terms. And it was just this really I've seen the light and I can't go back moment where I realized that there was an alternative, that I didn't have to opt into the 9 to 5 or the 9 to whenever people tell me I can go home life until I'm 70. I can really make my own way. And that was just angels came out of the heavens, and I was like, oh my gosh, I could really build a career and a life at the same time. And I can have a life and a career, and I don't have to choose one or the other. So that was really amazing. The fear, the leap part of it came into where I come from a really small town in a rural area of West Virginia. And so for me, getting out of my small town and into advertising was a big deal, because I could actually get out and see the world. And so now here I am, I'm 28. I have a really cool job where I can wear jeans to work. I'm shooting cool TV spots with celebrities. I can bring my dog in. I mean, everything about this job is cool and flashy and wonderful. and I'm going to say, you know what, it's 2008. I'm going to quit this job with no alternative and a loose plan. And everyone thought I was crazy. And when they would ask me these questions about like, well, what's your business going to be? And where are you going to be in 5 years? And how are you going to plan for retirement? I didn't really have any clear answers. So I spent a good amount, about 6 months or so, you know, trying to figure out what that plan might look like. And I didn't have a solid one, you know, and what I did was I actually putting together kind of a PowerPoint presentation to present to like my husband, or he was my fiance at the time. Like, this is why this makes sense, you know. And part of, I think, being an entrepreneur is you make those pitches outward. At the same time you're pitching yourself, you're like, yeah, this is what I'm doing. Yeah. And you find yourself kind of nodding along. And honestly, that's one of the best things you can do when you're starting, is just over and over again, say it confidently, even if you feel like you're playing dress up, because you need to believe it so that they will believe it. So I spent a good amount of time doing that in the beginning. But the biggest part of the leap for me, especially into the world of freelance, was, and this is largely what drove me towards building Uncompany, was there's such a lack of information. There's nothing what like you've created with FYSO. There was none of that kind of stuff then. It was just really, you know, you go to this blog and you talk to this person and you Google this and you go to Craigslist and you ask the guy at the post office, and it felt like you're kind of being dropped off, you know, into the void. And I think that for me in my industry and what I do, you know, with employment, and that I really have realized in the last 10 years that where we're employed and what we do is such a huge part of our identity, even more so now, because we spend so much of our time in our work, at work, and now work is accessible 24/7, and now we're working at home. So it's everywhere. But like when you step out of a full-time job, there's that real sense, that loss of identity. It's like, now who am I? I used to be IBM person, or I used to be this person, and now I'm not that. And there's a real loss of community, of course, opportunities, but then also kind of continuing education, because you kind of feel like your playbook is handed to you a lot of times when you start your job. And then when you opt out of that, you're like, oh crap, now what do I do? You know, and so there's that sense that's like, I'm not sure, what do I do this morning? And so building that pathway out of it is, you know, and kind of going through that experience in the beginning is really what helped me to build Uncompany. So the leap for me ended up kind of starting to inspire the business that I built.
I love that, and so much of it resonates. I mean, hence the term, like, the name figure shit out, because I mean, yes. Okay, so question, how did you find your first freelance clients? So I mean, you spent those 6 months. I love that idea of like creating a pitch deck and to keep saying it over and over again. But where did your first clients get sourced, and how did you go about finding them?
Yeah. So for me, like, I love to talk to people. And so it's leveraging your network. I mean, more so than ever before, our network is our lifeline, you know, and that is your most powerful tool in your toolbox as a startup, as an entrepreneur, as somebody who's just beginning, is talking to everybody who will hear your pitch, buying them coffee. And, you know, and it doesn't have to be, and people can be like, I'm just really afraid to ask for stuff. Like, never be afraid to ask. All you'll hear is no, or I'm sorry. Nobody died from no. You know, you just say like, hey, would you be interested in sitting down having a coffee with me? I'd love to tell you what I'm doing. Like, they will probably come to you in 3 years and ask for the same thing. So don't be afraid to ask. But just leveraging your network, you know, and talking to previous employers. I mean, I had so many of my first jobs came out of employers that I'd worked with previously, and I just came back. They knew who I was. They knew the work that I did. And that was part of it. The other way to do it is just to walk around, and like for me as a creative, because I was doing, you know, design and stuff like that, I was just walking around to different brands here locally in the Triangle, and even outside, and just emailing them or walking into the store and being like, hey, you know, I love your like thrift store. I have a couple thrift stores in the Triangle. I think they're super awesome. I love how you do consignment. I love the kind of brands you pull in. Like, if you ever need this or that, let me know. I'm a designer, you know, and sometimes they would say, oh, that's awesome, and they appreciate it, but I don't, but I know somebody who does. So multiple times it would be like the third person they would introduce me to would be a client of mine. But the thing is like, when you're asking people, when you're talking to people about your business, it's like, come to them and recognize them as also an entrepreneur. I think there's like this intimidation factor that it's like, that's a real business and I'm not a real business. I'm just kind of pretending over here. But it's like Nike is a real business and you are a real business. They're a little further along than you, but like they have the person who started that business also had an idea that was like, I'm going to take a leap and I'm going to step out. So like, if you can meet those people at that place and say like, you know, I noticed you built a really awesome business and I love your brand and I'd love to help with what I do if you're interested, then it's a real sincere place. So a lot of the stuff I did was like, I mean, at that time, downtown Durham was just really starting to open up. So I was walking into places like Dolly's and some of the storefronts that really moved back downtown first to kind of revitalize the city. And just saying like, hey, I love Durham. I love that you took a chance on moving back downtown. Like, I'd love to partner with you. And a lot of my first businesses were just that, just walking around and talking to people and drinking a ton of coffee. I did cut back.
I love it. I know we have some creatives and we have some B2B companies that kind of relates to, I love that. So you went downtown, you like used your network. How did that play into, I know you have some big corporate clients too. Like how has that worked out? Has it also been from your network? Do you have any specific B2B tips or business enterprise?
Then a lot of my larger clients came through people who I had worked with, or this person knows this person who works at Coke or Burt's Bees or so on. And just getting in there and having a conversation and giving the pitch as related to that department or skill. The other part of what we do, so we work with, you know, smaller startups all the way up to larger, like international type companies, is understanding what you have to offer just kind of in general, and then thinking about how it applies to those different sizes. So I would go and pitch a client like a smaller startup or like early stage startup differently than I would go and pitch Coke or Lenovo. I would think about the problems internally that what I sell can help them in light of what they need. So just kind of knowing your audience is a big part of I'm sure you've heard that 1,000 times, of knowing your audience and knowing what you need to say to them. Again, and not necessarily in a selling way, but like, hey, I see here's an opportunity for you to use what I can do. And you know, it's always fun to kind of figure out what problem that they have that you can help to solve.
You can never say it too much. What problem do they need? Who's your audience? I love it.
I got problems.
I mean, it's so real. What were some of the hardest lessons you learned? I mean, there's so much struggle that comes from entrepreneurship.
Mm-hmm.
What are your biggest takeaways?
Let's see. I wrote some of these down because that was a good question. So there's a ton. One of the toughest things I think is about learning how to set expectations. You know, I think when we're starting out, we're hustling so much to get business and to get things going and, you know, playing a little bit of that figure out game, but understanding like who you are as a business, what your mission is, where your break line is. Like, I will do this, I will not go this far, and making sure that you draw that line. You might lose clients, but that's okay, because you don't want to work with the clients that are going to push you across that line. That's tough. It's tough when you're like, but this is a good contract, or this will give me opportunities. Like, you know what? You'll regret those decisions. And if you choose not to go with that person, there will be backfill. You'll have 2 clients that will come and replace that client. I guarantee it. So learning how to set expectations up front, saying, this is how much I charge, this is what my product costs, this is what my services are and what my services aren't. Making that like just blindingly clear, putting it in a paper. Here's my responsive, like when you email me, expect an email back in 48 hours. Like, you know, things like all the way down to the minutia, having it super, super clear will really save you headaches and kind of those misfires in the back end. The other part of it is like, one thing that I struggle with, and I still struggle with it, is knowing that you are a person and then there is your business, and like separating those two. I mean, separating them legally and all that kind of stuff is like super good to do because you don't want to have mingling of accounts. But a lot of the decisions you'll make as you start and kind of keep going along is like, you have to make some decisions as a business that sucks for you as a person, like sucks for you as a person. Like, I've had to fire people who were my friends because I shouldn't have honestly hired them because I couldn't afford them, or it wasn't the right hire, wasn't the right time, you know, and that's because I mingled my emotions in my business. And it was my mistake, you know, and that sucks. And that's happened a couple of different times as far as like, you know, I'm realizing my emotional side of who I am is mingling with my business. And when you're a mission-driven entrepreneur, it's super easy because you have a good heart, you have a goal in mind, you know, and you're a single person. So you are like the bookkeeper, the housekeeper, the finance person, the like all the things. But like just every week I'm like, my business is this and I am an employee of my business. And so just keeping that in mind will really help you, you know, not get into those situations where like emotions can be really, really tough, because they are. And that was one of the hardest lessons that I have learned, and hopefully I will not have to continue to learn. I have written down here, like, don't be embarrassed by where you are. I struggle with this all the time. So I'm like, oh, I'll see people, I'm like, they've been open for 5 years and their website looks super awesome and it looks like they're crushing it. And I've been open for 5 years. I'm just barely patching things together, you know, and there's always that impression that somebody's further along, and maybe they are, maybe they're not. You just don't know. But, you know, there's something my mom used to always say to me, which is like, you are exactly where you are, where you should be right now. And you can't skip past it. You know, you can't skip past the lessons you'll have to learn. I think talking to other people like the group you have here and learning some of the mistakes and hopefully avoiding them. Like, I hope you get to avoid some of the ones I've made. But like, know that you're in the right place, you know, and those places you are it's not behind, it's not ahead, it's like exactly where you are. And so that's part of and social media is a dangerous little rabbit hole where we can fall into, especially with all that kind of stuff. And I have done here, which is kind of an add-on, is don't, you know, trust the process and don't compare. So that's part of it. You'll work through the process of making mistakes, and that's okay. Ask for help. So just basically what you're doing now, like if you're unsure about, like if you're going for funding and you're like, I don't even know, Series B, C, D, blah, 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 blah. Like, don't feel intimidated by people out there with big fancy degrees, because I don't have one and I'm intimidated. But go and ask them, be like, you know what, tell it to me like I'm a 3-year-old, you know, or whatever. And just ask those questions, and don't be afraid to ask for help. Like, hey, I noticed that you're connected to this person. I feel like we would be a really great business partnership. Would you be okay introducing me? Like, it's okay to do that. You know, I've done that for people do that for me. It's this nice kind of shared economy. And then I also have here, manage and understand where your goals are. So I think goal setting is like super duper important, because it's easy for us to like just blow through life, and you might have a mini goal in your head, and then you get 6 months past, you're like, oh yeah, actually I did meet that goal, but I never stopped to pause and celebrate. Super important to know, like, what is your goal right now? What is your goal in 6 months? What's your goal in five years or whatever? Totally will change, but at least having those little like milestones to aim for will help you kind of recognize your progress and like the busyness that we have.
Yes, we're talking goal setting next week. I love that advice. I know we've talked about an interesting point around competitors. So like looking at market, basically doing like competitive research, and then wondering, like making assumptions on how you can or cannot do things better. What's been your experience with that?
I think it's great to know the landscape of the industry you're in. You know, I think it's, you can be aware but not compare yourself. And I think that's a good place to do, because it's always good. It's good to learn from other people's mistakes. So if you know your competitors, you're like, ooh, I wouldn't do that. Then sweet, you've just saved yourself some time because you've kind of learned from their mistake. But it's also a great lesson. And I think when I was working in advertising, and it's always easy for us to be like, you know what, I'll be a much better boss than this person, or I'll redefine this business better because I won't do this, that, and the other. And then you start doing it and you realize why they made those choices. And you're like, oh, it's because they need to do this. And then the tax implication is this, and their margins were too small when this came into play. So I think just being aware of how business models exist in your space is super important. Another reason is why is because then you can be like, all right, I can take this part of the business model and this part of the business model, and I can tweak it here and here, and I can make this new one. So it's all of us are borrowing and recycling and building on each other. So it's also a little bit of like, think of it as like a box of Legos. You're like, I can just kind of build my own thing with the pieces that are already here. But what I wouldn't do is I wouldn't look at your competitors and think of it as a race, because there's like so many ways, there's so many points to get to success. They could very possibly be super successful in one industry, and you could be very successful in the same industry. There's plenty of room. Like, I think that's another part of being an entrepreneur, is hopefully people feel like that. There's a super abundance of opportunity. There's not a scarcity of opportunity. Like, if I'm successful, it doesn't mean you're going to fail. And that's another thing that like getting out of full time and that comparison like race really helped me in a big way. So it's like all of us can be successful. Like your idea of success could be very different than my idea of success. So, definitely be aware, don't compare. And it's good to have that information and knowledge.
That is awesome. Yes, no comparison.
I'm going to trademark that, by the way. I just made that up. So
I love it. Oh my gosh. Yes. Okay. So today we're talking about like the business model canvas. So I kind of have a question related to that. Okay. So you went from freelancing to this idea for Uncompany. How did you create your minimum viable product? And, what did that look like?
Yeah. The concept of the MVP was introduced to me when I was just starting out. I come from a sports background, so I was like, MVP, yeah, I know what that is. And I was like, oh, no, I don't. I don't know what that is. So when I started out, I knew loosely what I wanted to create. I wanted to create kind of a community that really advocated for freelancers. I knew that there was mistakes on the client side as well as the freelancer side, but I really didn't know quite what needed to be developed. So what I did in the process of developing my first MVP was to do a bunch of events, like talk to a ton of people on both sides, whether it's like, we'd get together and have happy hours, or I'd have surveys, or I'd have 1,001 coffees, and just put it out there and be like, this is what I've seen, this is what I'm thinking, what do you see? And that's another thing I see a lot of people get afraid of in the beginning, is they have this like nugget of an idea, and then they're just like, I'm gonna keep it here, I'm gonna put it under the bed, and no one's gonna touch it. And there's no way for it to develop. It's easy to create a nice, awesome idea in complete isolation, but it's not a business. It's just this cool idea. So get it out there and like take it out, talk to a million people about it, because it could very well change. So, and my initial idea from Uncompany totally changed. So we thought about doing this cool website. I spent 6 months building this website, put it out there. Nobody used it. And I told all the freelancers, like, yeah, this would be great. We're so excited. Oh, they all signed up for it. And then the clients, some of the clients were paying for it. Then the clients would still call me and be like, oh, I need an art director and a writer and a digital strategist, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, cool, go to the website, log in, type it. You have access to all those people. And they'd be like, great, can you tell me who we should put in there? So it was just, I was like, well, this is not the business I created, So the nice thing with creating the MVP, and the important thing about it is it allows for you to make those changes, right? It's like you build something, you don't make it too perfect, you make sure that all the spelling mistakes are out, hopefully, but just put it out there, and don't make it too super precious. There was somewhere that was saying like, don't spend longer than like 6 months developing an MVP. You get something together, test it, try it, tweak it, and then repeat. So we did that. The site wasn't working. But by seeing it, that kind of fail, I was like, oh, well, actually what people need is they need that kind of connection. They need that reference. They need that system put into place, and so then we went into our next phase, which was actually kind of helping to create those connections and vet people and put together teams. And then it tweaked from there even further, where we're like, okay, well, now this is what we're supposed to be doing. So we're doing it, and we're testing out the service. And then we realized we're getting caught into this like massive churn of paperwork for tiny projects. And I was like, well, I take a look at my business as a whole. And I realized that based on the finances, like projecting the finances, the amount of work coming in, like we're going to completely cannibalize any kind of profit because our margins are too small based on the amount of work we're putting in. So I'm like, okay, let's go back again, retweak, build something new. And so last year we actually created a whole new service, which we tested out with another client. And that now is where I feel like our business is going. So it's like building an MVP that's not too precious, that's not too much of a massive investment from a time and financial perspective, allows you to slowly let your business develop. Because you just can't know everything. And in a year, it could be a totally different business. But yeah, I think the MVP process is like super essential. It also helps you get an idea how much it's going to cost you to run your business before you jump in and buy a building or something crazy like that. And you're like, oh crap, I don't need to bake cakes. Why did I buy this building? So it helps you to slowly make those steps in a really scaled way.
Yes, yes, yes. If and when people follow that advice, they can save years and so much money.
we could like probably talk to 1,001. Well, and you get me started on the whole investor circuit, but it's like, it's definitely, there's smart ways to spend money, and there's smart ways to scale your business where you don't have to take off massive loans and massive debt and massive overhead. I mean, a large part of what we do with our clients is advocate for this, what we call adaptive staffing, where it's like, let's test these positions, make sure they're viable, make sure it's a good fit on both sides before we jump in, and so I'm very much a low overhead type of entrepreneur.
Yes, I love it. Does anyone in the group have any questions? I love that Jill was complimenting your octopus. That is amazing.
Yeah, octos are spirit animal. To me, it's like the perfect animal for what we are, which is like, one body, many skills. So we have so many different, multi-dimensional freelancers. We're kind of all connected through one body. So and octopuses are super cool. They're super cool.
I was just looking, and first the gun came up.
Oh yeah.
Uncompany.com.
We also run
I was like, that can't be her.
Yeah. I've tried to email that guy for the last 5 years. I'm like, hey, I know you guys have a business, but no.
Yeah, but anyway, I was just looking at this black page, and all of a sudden, I'm like, what is that? I love it.
I love it too. Does anyone else have any questions, or does anyone have any questions, I suppose? And if not, I have one final one, so no pressure.
How about the first time you had to fire a client? Like you took something because you felt like you should do it, and then what made you realize that it was not a fit, and how'd you get out of it?
It's tough. I think that goes back to really setting expectations. So, for us, when we start with a new client, we put them through an onboarding process, which involves slow down, like we have them fill out a whole onboarding worksheet. We talk to them, we're really transparent about rates, about what we cost and why. So when we have people who come in, maybe have a little bit of Upwork in their system or some Craigslist experience, or they've worked with their mom's, dad's, guy they know from college to do the website. And it's like, well, I can get it cheaper on Fiverr. We have a conversation pretty early that's like, this is what it costs, and this is why. We're working with senior people. We let everybody quote their own rate. We don't cut into people's fee. We trust that every single freelancer is their own business, and so we respect their business for that. And we just tell them, like, if you're expecting to come in here and get it cheaper than anywhere else, or faster and cheaper, then we're not a good fit. We've had a couple clients we've had to go back to who have not they're like, yeah, it sounds good. And then we get into this like churn where they're kind of pushing back, or they're honestly not respecting or treating people fairly. And I've had a couple conversations, and they're super uncomfortable. And it's just like, this is why we are what we are. We work with senior people, we see them all as business owners. We understand if this doesn't make sense to your budget, it's no harm, no foul, and here's some good recommendations. We have some clients who will come to us and they're like, we really want to work with your folks. It's just too expensive for us. I will still take their project, and I'll email it out to people and be like, hey, does anybody know or want to take this on pro bono? But we've had to end a few contracts, and it's usually at a place where it's not hard feelings. It's just like, this is just not a good fit, and that's okay. Mm-hmm. That's usually because we do a lot of pre-vetting up front to make sure that, we can kind of point back to a contract that they signed, or back to this is our services, this is how we represent ourselves. And it's pretty clear, and so they can't really go like, oh, well, you misled us. It's like, well, this is what we said. So we try to do everything pretty upfront. Someone told me that, like, when you do an agreement, like the prenuptial agreement or a contract upfront, it's really not an agreement. It's really a disagreement. So if we ever get to a place where we have a disagreement, we look back at the agreement, and then it's all really clearly outlined. So was hard for me in the beginning, was filling out contracts and putting all those like legal things in place. But I realize now it's like 9 times out of 10, you're not gonna have to touch them, but they're there in place to like protect everybody at the end of the day. So I would highly recommend having someone help you out with those.
Contracts are no joke. I've definitely used them. When also that whole expectation setting, I remember I like listened to a podcast and like I'd heard this advice, and then I immediately like had a client engagement where the expectations weren't Like they had one expectation, I had a different one. I mean, we went back to the contract, but I was just like, oh, it's so easy to sometimes to hear advice, and then it's another thing to live it and learn the process. So
look at everything that you say and you sign and say, where is the squishiness? Like where is the places for miscommunication? When you say,
right.
get everything, what is everything? How many of everything is there? What sizes are they? Where are they going? When am I getting them? Like it can sound really like, oh, it's a little uptight, but it's like, then you don't have to worry about it. You know, it's like, oh, we've taken that out. You know, we put the sandbox around and we're good to go. But yeah, the miscommunication expectation management is key.
Oh, so here's a question about that to go a little bit deeper. Is the expectation setting part of your sales process, or do you actually have like a specific conversation before they even sign the contract to just make sure they understand how it works?
Yes. So our process for our clients is we have initial intake call, go through our whole spiel. This is how we work. This is why we work the way we do. This is more or less kind of where we price and how we operate. This is our expectation for a timeline. So when a client comes in, and part of what we've been trying to change with Uncompany is like we're really trying to develop an operating system for people to work through as far as for freelancers. And that's largely getting companies to think proactively about freelance staffing and less about like, oh my gosh, my developer quit, I'm panicking, you know. And so we try to get everyone to slow down and follow the process. So we have all those conversations up front. When we get into it, we're signing a contract, we're helping to set up a freelancer, we're helping to build a freelance team. Everything is super duper outlined. Here's what the project is, here's what the scope is, here's what the deliverables are, here's where the work will be done, here's if it's a contract, here's when their available times are, here's who's signing off and approving, and then if there's any kind of hourly overage that's discussed, here's that. We put everything very, very clearly. And what we do, we send that to the freelancer, make sure they're all good and they understand it. They give us their quote. We take that information back to the client and say, based on the job description that you gave us, and we have the clients actually fill it out. So it's not us doing telephone game, like trying to remember what they said. They fill it out, send it to us. So we take that verbatim from them. Freelancer quotes it. We share that with the client. They say yes, and we say, okay, good. Now that you said that, let's get on the phone and you guys talk again, because that changes, right? The scopes change from Thursday to Tuesday. The freelancer hears this, the client, and the freelancer says, yep, scope's still the same, we're not going to change it. We go back and lock everything in, and then everything is transparent, shared with the freelancer, shared with the client, timesheets are all shared. So there's really no room for squishiness. And then if the freelancer calls us or the client says, like, hey, the scope has changed, we need to uplift the money, or we're going to tweak the company, and the freelancer can call to, hey, they've actually added more deliverables. I would say 99% of the time I can call a client like, hey, I heard the deliverable has changed. Can we increase the budget? They're like, yep, no problem, because it's all so outlined. So it's just making sure that it's, super, super, super clear, and honestly allowing them to like actually write it out. It's like, you guys wrote this. We agreed to it based on this price. We didn't translate. So taking yourself out of the middle of translation is like really key too.
Ooh, and that's such great advice too for, everyone that's in the services businesses, but also if you're ever hiring a contractor or, working with an agency like Uncompany, these are the details you should be asking. So you actually get, you're on the same page and you don't end up with a messy relationship.
Yeah, with contractors, because again, they can be pretty tricky. You sit down and you say, this is what I'm expecting of you. This is when I want it. This is how it's going to be delivered. Like, be really, really poignant on it. And you might have some that are like absolutely following it. Some that are like, yeah, man, it's fine, whatever. And then they disappear. Like one thing we vet out for our freelancers is we expect everyone to be very, very professional and to respond and be quick. So you should hold your contractors to that as well. And if they don't operate like that, let them go, because they're going to drive you nuts. They're going to disappear. They're going to ghost on you. They're going to not deliver the files or whatever. But I also encourage businesses to get reviews or references on contractors too.
That's a great idea. Do you have any parting advice? You have such a strong why, and I love that. Like, you stuck with your why. Knowing that we have a group of mission-driven entrepreneurs, is there anything else they should consider based on your journey?
I think for the fact that you guys are mission driven, one of the things that I would continue, that I tell entrepreneurs I work with that are mission driven is, again, since you're so passionate and you have such amazing goals in mind, don't lose sight of the fact that you have to make money as a business to stay open to do your mission. You know, a lot of folks that I work with who are mission driven, they're like, I'm like, hey, we'll look at their finances. Like, you guys have to be really solid with your finances. You have to know your numbers or you won't have a business. You have to have a P&L sheet. You got to bake it out. You got to look at it. You got to do all the things. I'm an art and English major. So if I can get an Excel and put formulas together, you guys got this. But like, you should know your numbers and look at your margins and have an idea of like, when I start to grow, when this business grows, I need to hire, or I need to get space, or I need to buy more product or whatever. What does that look like, and how is that going to affect my income, like what I'm making? Because some of the things I see with people who are starting mission businesses is they're really scared about making money. They feel bad about it. You know, I don't know, but you know, it's a good cause. And like, but if you don't have a business, your business isn't open, your cause is not going to live. And one of the things that I saw coming out of COVID from another entrepreneur, which I thought was like really insightful, was he had to lay off like pretty much all of his staff within the first 3 weeks. And I remember talking to him and I was like, wow, I was like, you laid off really super duper quickly. Like, could you not have like waited a little bit and, you know, seen if things turned around? And he's like, I learned pretty early. He's been in business for some time. And he's like, you have to cut early and cut deep, because my goal as a business owner is that this business needs to be alive and afloat at the end of this pandemic so that I can hire these people back. He's like, that's my responsibility, you know, is to make sure that I have a business that's going to make it through so that these people can come back so that we can keep growing. He's like, I could have kept them on for another month and burned through cash, and then they're out of a job and my business is closed and no one's getting their jobs back. So again, that kind of goes back to like thinking about the business and what's best for the business. But definitely, you know, remember, like, you have to make money. You need to know your numbers. Don't be afraid about talking about money. You know, and the goal is to have all these awesome mission-driven businesses that are really changing the world and are open and are doing it well and creating, you know, good opportunities for people. So I think it's awesome that there's so many of you guys that are doing this kind of stuff. It's super encouraging. So thanks for that.
Yay, and great advice. No money, no mission.
Yeah, we need money. It's a tool. Remember, like, money is not your value. It's just a tool that we use to run our businesses. So, you know, keep those things separated.
I love it. Well, Maari, thank you so much again for coming and talking to us today. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, for real. It's great to meet all you guys. Take care. Enjoy.